Hey, another episode of The Bitter Pill. I'm Jeff Melton, your host, and tonight I've been going to talk about something that has been on my mind really for the entirety of Joe Biden's term as quote unquote president. Um, Although yeah, he's really kind of the demented resident in chief, and that is that I really think that the claim that the Democrats are the lesser evil, in many ways, is kind of outdated, and I'm gonna, uh, explain why I think that's the case. Uh, ever since I became disgusted enough with the Democratic Party in the '90s to stop voting for Democratic presidential candidates anymore, and instead started supporting wonderful third party candidates like Ralph Nader and Jill Stein, and less enthusiastically supported third party candidates such as Howie Hawkins in 2020, which, contrary to AOC's claim, Jill Stein did not run that year. Howie Hawkins did. Jill Stein also wasn't planning on running this time, but Cornel West dropped out. But anyway, um, ever since, way back when, 3 decades ago, when I started paying attention to this debate over the wisdom or relevance of voting for third parties, the left's counterargument to the liberal admonition that even if we didn't like their preferred candidate, we had to hold our nose and vote for him or her because we simply couldn't afford to allow the ultimate evil their Republican opponent represented to come to power. And they always say, "This is the most important election of your life. You have to vote Republican, or excuse me, Democrat this time, because the Republican is an existential threat." And our stock counter argument has always been, well, the lesser evil is still evil. The Democrats are warmongers, they're corporate owned, and their policies follow accordingly from that. And voting for them is not only condoning their immoral and often illegal acts, but it's passing up an opportunity to build up a force for good. A third party that rejected the ultimate evil of capitalism and imperialism, unlike the two capitalist imperialist parties that rule our country. And of course, there's ample evidence for our claim. The Korean War, the Vietnam War, various smaller attacks on sovereign nations, such as those on Libya and Syria, were started under Democratic administrations. Woodrow Wilson, a Democrat, got the U.S. into World War I, which was simply a conflict between various imperialist nations fighting over the spoils of their empires. The only world leader to use nuclear weapons was a Democrat, Harry Truman. Every war the U.S. has been involved in fact, has had the support of many or most congressional Democrats. So it was a little under half, for example, of Senate Democrats, a little over half of Senate Democrats, and a little under half of House of Representatives Democrats supported the Iraq War. All of them in Congress, except for one, Barbara Lee, supported the authorization of the Afghanistan war. Scores of coups and coup attempts have been initiated under Democratic administrations. The latest one was yet another attempt to overthrow Venezuela's government just recently. There was also a coup in Pakistan not too long ago, and there have been other coups or coup attempts that I am blanking on the names of the countries, but uh, Biden has been no different from his predecessors in terms of um, all of this. Although the Republicans are worse on environmental issues, you take a look at those environmental scorecards that various nonprofit organizations put out, and the Republicans are clearly worse. Nonetheless, the revolving door between polluting industries and the U.S. government has been a thing, regardless of which party is in the White House. And Obama and Biden have been the presidents most responsible for raising oil and gas production to world leading levels. The US is literally the number one producer right now of oil and gas, even though it's pretty far down the list in terms of the amount of oil reserves. It's pretty high up on gas, but anyway, natural gas. Okay, well, that is a summary of some of the similarities. But I would like to suggest that the standard notion that Democrats are the lesser evil compared to the Republicans is no longer true. Now, of course, the vote blue, no matter who, Democrats or liberals, will try to convince you otherwise. There's one in particular that's been all over Jill Stein's posts lately, making claims that Donald Trump is much, much, much worse than Kamala Harris, or Kamala Harris, however you want to say it, and whining about how horrible Jill Stein is for, quote, helping Trump win and all that. And this fellow pretends that he supports third parties and used to vote for the Greens. And I'm just, even though there's a ton of shit libs, vote blue no matter who folks I could talk about, just in the interest of time, I'll focus on this one dumbass, Christopher Cook, an alleged journalist who pretends that he supports third parties and used to vote for the Greens. Let's take a look at some of what Mr. Cook has said. Okay, so he says, well, look at the Inflation Reduction Act, which Biden admitted the other day was misnamed because it wasn't principally about inflation, but about environmental policy. But he had omitted the fact that in addition to increasing support for alternative energy and creating some jobs associated with that, it also opened up vast amounts of new acreage to drilling for gas and oil. So he claims they've created millions of jobs and helped address the climate crisis. Well, is that really true? I mean, a general question I have, Christopher, and others who support this claim that Biden is so superior to Trump and by extension Harris, who's Biden's vice president, and hasn't complained about anything he's done, has vocally supported pretty much everything. So what I want to know is how exactly did Biden, after solidly beating a pretty unpopular incumbent in 2020, Donald Trump, who's running again, how did Biden wind up being the most unpopular president in my very long lifetime? I was born in 1961. And Biden is, in fact, the most unpopular US president in 70 years. Imagine that. 70 years since anybody has been unpopular, as unpopular as Joe Biden. You're more unpopular than Carter, who got caught in a time of extreme inflation, and also, it turns out that the Reagan team rigged things so that the Iranian the American hostages wouldn't be released by Iran until after the election. Anyway, so Biden's the least popular president in 70 years. Well, it turns out that a lot of the things that this fellow and others have said about Biden's accomplishments are um, just exaggerated or outright false. And many of the uh, horrible deeds are simply omitted by these folks. Well, let's look at so-called job creation. Um, a lot of it involved uh, recovery from a COVID-induced global recession. The unemployment rate approached 10% in 2020 during the lockdowns, and it went back up, but it took quite a while for the economy to recover, and so naturally jobs were added when the economy recovered from a recession. But although wages have gone up, that's partly been largely really because of a labor shortage created by mass short-term and long-term illness due to COVID and long COVID. The minimum wage is still stuck at $7.25, where it's been ever since George Bush signed the minimum wage increase bill 15 years ago. So if you recall, of course, Biden promised to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour, and so did every other Democrat campaigning in 2020. And of course, the Republicans said they were against that increase. But the Democrats didn't really do much of anything to fight for an increase in the minimum wage. They just let a close vote go the wrong way. What about inflation, which curiously never gets mentioned or gets lied about by shitlib Democrat supporters? It's been at levels not seen in over 40 years um, uh, for the majority of Biden's term. Um, let's have a look at the figures. So you can see back in the 70s and early 80s, it was very high. It didn't reach anywhere near that level again until Joe Biden came in office. So in 2021, overall for the year, it was 7%. 2022, it was 6.5%. A little better in 2023, but if we break it down by month, it basically shows us that from uh, the first few months of Biden's term, the inflation rate jumped from below 2% during much of Trump's term. It averaged below 2%, up to 4 or 5% by April and May, and then it went up to 7% by the end of 2021. Then it reached a peak of 9.1% in June of 2022. It didn't really come down to anywhere near its previous levels until the middle of last year. And what's particularly difficult for people is that inflation has been the worst in the area of basic necessities like food and transportation and housing. The dollar has also declined over the last few years, probably to a significant extent because the economic sanctions against Russia backfired, and there's been this mass exodus of investment from the U.S. dollar and use of the U.S. dollar in foreign countries' trade with each other. So food prices are they've just skyrocketed. Rent is up like 25%, and so on and so forth. Yeah, these comfortable upper middle class or wealthy Democrats will tell you, hey, Biden's been great for the economy, but most ordinary people will not say that. More than half of people don't have enough savings to handle a $500 plus emergency. So, get out of here. The economy's not good. You may recall that a big issue in the 2020 campaign was how poorly Donald Trump had handled COVID. And, it's true in a lot of ways. He downplayed its severity. He appeared to be, against masks and lockdowns, of course, which, whatever you may think personally about wearing a mask or 3 months or 2 or 3 months worth of shutdowns of businesses and schools and so forth to prevent the spread of COVID prior to there being a vaccine. The evidence definitely shows that those things help reduce infection rates. And so Trump had a bit over 400,000 people die of COVID on his watch, up until late January of 2021 when he left office. But was he far worse on COVID than Biden, as this fellow and many other Democrats have claimed? Not really. Not really. Okay. So 407,000 was the number of people who died from COVID between when the pandemic began in the United States, which the first deaths were, I guess, in late January or early February, up until January 21st, 2021, when Trump left and Biden came in. 407,000 deaths. Well, how many were there during Biden's first year in office? Well, more than 400,000. So, it looks like about 440,000. So, actually, a bit more than Trump had during his tenure. And, granted, there weren't that many cases of COVID until mid March or so of 2020. But uh, Trump didn't have the advantage of the vaccine. He spearheaded the funding of production and distribution of the vaccines. Um, but we only started our vaccination program in December of 2020. So basically, almost the entirety of Trump's term was without any benefit from the vaccines. Now, um, whatever you may think about the vaccine's ability to prevent infections, which once the virus evolved, and especially once people's vaccine-induced immunity began to decline a few months after they got vaccinated, the ability to prevent infection went down by quite a bit. But many, many studies have shown that the vaccines prevented a lot of deaths, millions, just in the United States alone. But Biden benefited from there being a pretty high vaccination rate in the United States for most of his first year in office, and of course since then. Trump did not. So you tell me, is Trump really worse on COVID than Biden was? When Biden basically um, ditched mask mandates for vaccinated people in May of 2021. Push for schools to be opened up, despite there being a vector for COVID infections, and so on and so forth. Basically declared the pandemic completely over in 2022, even though, or no, maybe it was 2023, but we're still in a pandemic. It's just not killing as many people because people have more immunity now. But anyway, so that's another area where this notion that Trump is way worse than Harris would be is just not borne out by the evidence. And although it's certainly the case that Trump, like other Republicans, is worse on environmental issues than Biden or Harris or other Democrats, it's ludicrous to claim that Biden has been good on environmental issues. There's an unprecedented amount of oil and gas drilling that's gone on um, under Biden. Biden's environmental policy is a far cry from even AOC's very much watered down version of the Green New Deal, a proposal that was written by the Green Party's Howie Hawkins back in, I believe it was 2008. And he ran on it for governor of New York in 2010. Harris rejects the Green New Deal. Harris also supports fracking. And although it isn't by itself a major contributor to greenhouse gas emissions, we have pretty solid evidence, thanks to the reporting of Seymour Hersh, that the Biden administration was responsible for the sabotage of the Nord Stream pipelines, the biggest single emission event in history, greenhouse gas emission event. And of course, war is very environmentally destructive, and the Biden administration has gotten us into two of them, and sabotage efforts along with their friends in Israel and Ukraine to bring those conflicts to an end. Um, well, what else have the Democrats claimed about differences between Harris and Trump? Mm, Well, one thing that they've claimed is that the Dems are far better, as this fellow Christopher Cook says, on women's rights, LGBT and LGBTQI. I'm not sure what I is, rights. Well, is that really true? Well, of course, it was thanks to a majority of Republican appointed judges that Roe v. Wade was overturned in 2022, I believe it was. But the story doesn't end there. Biden and his Democratic predecessors have had countless opportunities to codify Roe v. Wade into law and pass them up. They also botched opportunities to appoint Supreme Court justices who supported Roe v. Wade. So you may recall Ruth Bader Ginsburg insisted on staying in the Supreme Court almost to her dying day, even though she was in her 80s, she had cancer, she could have retired, and Obama could have appointed somebody else to the Supreme Court to take her place. That didn't happen. The Democrats also botched an opportunity to appoint a Supreme Court justice during Obama's last year. They simply didn't push to have it voted on. After Roe v. Wade was overturned, Biden promised to set up abortion providers on federal land. He's never done so, hasn't really done anything else that I'm aware of, at least. If somebody knows of anything, please mention it in the comments. Hasn't done anything else really to restore abortion rights. And so basically, it seems to me the Democrats just use abortion rights as a political football, as a way to get us to vote for them. But then they don't do much to promote abortion rights. Now, despite what you might think if you only listen to shitlibs like Christopher Cook, abortion isn't the only women's rights issue. And the Democrats are not particularly good on various other women's rights issues. So, the Biden administration eviscerated Title IX, the famous Civil Rights Act passed in the 70s that did an enormous amount to promote equality between the sexes in terms of sports and in terms of higher education. Making sure that women had the same amount of scholarships for college as men, for example, both in athletics and otherwise. But the Biden administration changed the language of Title IX to make it about quote unquote gender rather than sex, and thus allowed males who claim to be women, such as what is name, the swimmer Leah Thomas, to compete in women's sports. So under Biden's legislation, males who claim to be women not only can participate in women's sports, but they can also win both athletic and academic scholarships that originally were meant for women. And you might ask, as Matt Walsh did, well, what is a woman? Well, if you look in any dictionary, the first definition you see is it's an adult human female. But the entirety of the Democratic Party has tried to redefine woman as a gender identity that anyone can claim. And that basically boils down to someone who adheres to female gender stereotypes rather than as an adult female human. Doesn't sound particularly progressive or feminist or woman friendly to me to do that. The Democrats also gaslit the public about efforts by Republicans to protect women and girls' sports, falsely claiming that they banned trans people from sports, when in fact, the bans only prohibited biological males from competing in women's or girls' sports. So, regardless of who you claim to be, uh, if you were born male and go through male puberty, you have a physical advantage in athletics. And depending on the sport, it can be extremely huge. Um, so, for instance, studies have shown that males, on average, can punch about 2.5 times as hard as females. Um, these bills that the Democrats were in an uproar about didn't prohibit females from competing in men's or boys' sports. It was just about making women's and girls' sports continue to be or be restored to being female only, to exclude the possibility of an unfair physical advantage. The Democrats have also stood against protecting female only spaces, such as women's locker rooms, rape crisis and domestic violence centers, and prisons. I mean, you tell me, if you're a woman who's been raped, do you want to talk about your rape in front of someone who, despite however much they may put on makeup or um, otherwise try to alter their physical appearance to appear less male, everybody can see it's a man. Um, People aren't stupid. Um, and so if you're a woman in that situation trying to talk about your rape with other women, share your experiences, you don't want a man there. um Same thing in prison, of course. Obviously males are the ones who commit rapes, and in prison you're literally captive, and it's easier for people to rape you. um in all of these positions regarding uh, female sports and spaces that the Democrats have taken are quite contrary to the majority of the public's opinions. Even, I might add, the positions of Democrats and liberals. So, a poll taken in California found that the majority of those surveyed, including Democrats, which there are a lot of in California, it's a very Democratic state, um, you know, supported sports and spaces like locker rooms and prisons being female only. You wouldn't know that if you listened to our elected officials. Now, here's quite the extraordinary claim. Christopher Cook says, respectfully, I know Biden and Harris have been terrible by supporting Israel's war crimes, but don't you realize that Trump will be even worse? A lot worse. Um, well, how exactly is this? Could this be true, Chris? Because, if you've looked at recent estimates of the number of deaths in Gaza, in the Gaza genocide, um, yeah, of course, we know the Gaza, the Palestinian Health Ministry can't accurately estimate the number of people that have been killed. They don't have the resources, especially because of Israel's obliterated their healthcare infrastructure. So they estimate like 40 some thousand, but it's clearly way more than that, especially when you include uh, indirect deaths due to Israel cutting off food and water and medical supplies and every other necessity of life, and bombing Gaza's infrastructure to oblivion. That's going to create a lot of disease, a lot of starvation. Most Palestinians in Gaza are literally starving right now. And so the Lancet, way back in June, 3 months ago now, estimated that at a minimum, 186,000 Palestinians in Gaza had been killed, and several hundred and growing in the West Bank as well. And unless this is stopped, the West Bank's going to go in the same direction as Gaza. A more recent estimate pegs the total at around 300,000 deaths. Because actually, despite the high number that they came up with, the authors of the letter to the Lancet noted that their estimate was a very conservative estimate. So you tell me, like in less than a year, you're telling me that in less than a year, more than 10% of the population of Gaza would have been killed if Trump had been president. What exactly has the Biden administration done to restrain Israel's actions? Fucking nothing. Not a goddamn thing. They have been sending Israel weapons at unprecedented levels every day since October 7th. They've opposed numerous ceasefire resolutions put forward at the UN by Russia and various other nations. They've dismissed South Africa's case, alleging that Israel is committing genocide as nonsense, and otherwise propagandized at every turn in favor of Israel. Biden repeating the demonstrably evidence-free allegations of beheaded babies. It's actually saying he had seen photographs of them. That's his dementia talking there, even though there was no evidence whatsoever. On his own aides called him out on this and said, "No, Joe, that's not true." And he kept repeating it anyway, and others have as well. And of course, the mass rape hoax continues, even though there's still no evidence for that, and every claim has been debunked. And of course, they've gone out of their way to crack down on and just massively repress anybody who protested against this genocide, accusing them of anti-Semitism. Kamala Harris has shown a quote-unquote documentary purportedly showing that Hamas had committed mass rape on October 7th. That video has been thoroughly debunked by many people, but Harris continues to promote that claim. And like when you look at what's happened in Gaza, not only all the deaths, but well over half of the buildings have been destroyed. Basically, everyone has been made refugees. Israel constantly tortures anybody they take prisoner, rapes them, etc. Poll suggests that the majority of Israelis want to basically wipe Palestinians out. And there have been no sincere attempts by the Biden administration to restrain Israel at all. So this notion that Trump would somehow do worse than what Biden et al. Have already done is insane. And the notion that Harris is any more serious about a ceasefire than her boss has been is equally ludicrous. She's made it very clear that she opposes an arms embargo. So one of her advisors recently uh, um, reiterated that she opposes cutting off weapons shipments to Israel. She said in her speech at the DNC, just a total warmongering speech, that she was 100% committed to giving Israel everything it needed to quote unquote defend itself. So, this idea that she sincerely supports a ceasefire just because she claims that she supports one is, I mean, is just incredibly naive and not supported by the facts whatsoever. Because as Elon Omar, who I have a lot of problems with, but she's been good on uh, Palestine for the most part, as she put it recently, if the Biden administration wanted there to be a ceasefire, it's very simple. It could simply cut off the flow of weapons because something like 75 or 80% of Israel's weapons come from the United States. And, they're already running out of some things. You know, the attacks by Hezbollah and others, Iran's uh, launch of drones and missiles in April in retaliation for uh, Israel bombing the Iranian embassy in Syria. Um, they've really put a dent in Israel's missile defense capacity. It's really depleted, to the tune of billions of dollars, their capacity to shoot down missiles and drones and so forth. Another thing that the vote blue, no matter who Democrats won't mention, or if they do mention it, they'll defend this war, is they don't talk about the fact that it was under Biden, not Trump, that the U.S. proxy war against Russia, the Ukraine war, began. And that war is literally supported by every single congressional Democrat, as well as, of course, Biden and Harris. There's no literally no daylight between any of the Democrats on this issue. They all support it. Some of the Republicans are against it. And who knows whether he's sincere or not? Probably not, given his first term. But Trump has talked about wanting to end it, saying it's not in our interest, and so forth. But this war was very much provoked by the United States. I talked before about how the U.S. backed a coup in Ukraine in 2014 that was very right wing and authoritarian. The elements that largely came to power, they waged a war against ethnic Russians in Ukraine, among others. Basically, a civil war broke out in eastern Ukraine. And that was planned by that was what the U.S. wanted to happen. There was a Rand I forget the Rand Corporation, a think tank, issue report talking about the need to weaken Russia. And propose various strategies, including using Ukraine as a tool for doing so, through arming it. And Lloyd Austin also has acknowledged, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin has also acknowledged that the goal of the Ukraine war was to weaken Russia. No real concern for the interests of Ukraine. Their country has been destroyed by this war. They've lost 500,000 soldiers. Russia's lost 50,000 or so themselves. And this war has brought us closer to a nuclear war. than we've ever been, according to the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists. And of course, as always, regardless of which party occupies the White House, there have been coup attempts under Biden, most recently in Venezuela. And there was a successful coup in Pakistan, and more recently, another successful coup in, I forget what country now, somewhere in Asia and elsewhere. And, why are there all these similarities? Well, I think it's the corporate money, right? Chris Cuomo, of all people, brilliantly and succinctly summarized why there's not that much difference between the two parties in a lot of areas. Let me just play his video clip and, talking about the rule of the elite over the Democratic Party, just as they do over the Republican Party.
A big theme here at the DNC is that they're going to go after corporate gouging, and they're going to go after corporations, whether it's in taxes, largesse, loopholes. The RNC, we heard the same thing. They're going after the elites, the two sets of rules. Let me reveal a reality to you that has to be spoken to here, okay? These are the soldiers. These are the men and the women that go back to their constituencies and their communities, and they fight. They take time from their jobs. They take time from their families. Republicans and Democrats alike, that's what they do. They need to charge these people up. They need to be able to get them on board. But there's another reality that is literally looking down on them. Greg, look at the ring of sweets, okay? This is not unique to Democrats. There is a game of money. When people talk about uniparty, we are strangled by the money reality in our politics. Those suites start at 500 grand. You think there's like a teacher group up in there? You think it's like the Cub Scouts of Columbia County, South Carolina, that's up in those boxes? Some of them are lobbies and good things. The media boxes, you think they're free? Why do you think I'm on the floor? News Nation is not a broke company. Nexstar is a massive organization. We are corporate media. We don't have one of those boxes because that's the game. You pay to play. Those boxes are filled with the same people that they say they're going to regulate. They are literally looking down on the faithful and being told, yeah, we're going to break down on them. We're going to make them pay their share. They paid 500, 700, $1 million, $1.5 million to have those seats. They get hotel suites that are probably gifted to the party. And the same thing is true with the Republican side. And they're going to take them down. They're going to change how it is. They are looking down from on high at the people who make the difference in their communities. And that is the reality of politics. And I had my producer walk around and show you those suites. Now, they're not all the same. They're not all the same. But the reality is, in 2000, they spent $300 million on presidential campaigns. 24 years later, you know what they're expected to spend? $10 billion. Do you know how much money Harris has raised in the last couple of weeks? Hundreds of millions. And that's success. A lot of it's small donor, a lot of it isn't. The most dangerous money in politics is now legal money because of Citizens United. You've got to know this. The idea that they can fight against it is almost laughable. It's almost laughable. So look and listen when you are told these things. Because I don't care what they promise you. Not here tonight, not at the RNC, not that Trump knows them, not that they don't own them. He did one of the biggest fundraisers I've ever heard of in my life out where I live. Millions of dollars at plate. That's the reality of politics. A big theme.
So not only does the vote blue no matter who crowd's thesis, there are huge differences between Trump and Harris not stand up to scrutiny for reasons that we Greens have been hammering on since the Nader campaigns, as Chris Cuomo, who's no longer with the big corporate media, revealed in this segment. But this time, as I've discussed, there are about as many ways in which Harris would be worse as there are ways in which Trump would be worse. And the irony here is that even if shitlibs like Christopher Cook we're right that there's a big difference between Trump and Harris. I mean, what they don't tell you is that it doesn't even matter who you vote for in all but about half a dozen states. In California, where Cook lives and Harris is from, Harris is ahead in polls by, at least 20%. Like most vote blue, no matter whose shit lives, Christopher Cook plans on voting for Harris anyway. Just like I could mention some names in alternative media, like Jordan Chariton and who else am I thinking of? Emma Vigeland. Live in deep blue states. They're still planning on voting for Harris. This fellow Cook pretends to be supportive of third parties. He's not, obviously. If he won't even vote for them in a deep blue state. So, I mean, what can I say? Stupidity and dishonesty are par for the course among these folks. Don't be like them. Vote green, vote PSL. Help build a stronger socialist third party. And give them money or volunteer if you can. Vote for Jill Stein or others who are not only against Israel's genocide, but overall represent the greater good, not the lesser evil. And let's build an alternative to the supporters of capitalism and imperialism. All right. Thanks for watching. I will see you next time.